guys, how you doing? I am back to working on my Stihl 066, and in the last video I put up, I did install a new carburetor. The old carburetor had limiting caps, and I think it was basically just worn and tired, and I replaced it with a carburetor that didn't have limiting caps, and the saw ran infinitely better. So I was still having some issues with the chain running while the saw was at idle, and also because I replaced the carburetor, the old grommet that goes up here in the saw did not fit the carburetor I installed. So I just wanted to go over a whole bunch of stuff that's kind of housekeeping, but may help somebody if they're ever working on an old 066. So the first thing I just wanted to talk about was, I do have the Stihl piston stop. So you put this in the cylinder and you move the piston, so you're basically holding the piston in place when you remove the clutch. The clutch on the saw is reverse threaded, so it's righty loosen, lefty tighten. But when I put the piston stop in, it was later in the day and I was getting a little bit frustrated with this project. I probably should have walked away, but I did put the piston stop in wrong and I ended up nicking the tip there. So I guess I just want to do a public safety message that, take your time when you're removing your clutch or using the piston stop. And hopefully this is just going to be an example of the reason these are made out of plastic. And I've looked in the cylinder and I've seen no damage. So hopefully we're going to be fine on that. The next issue I was having was with the chain moving when the saw was at idle. So I did go to my Stihl dealer. I just brought the clutch with me and the piece that goes over the clutch there. And the dealer kind of looked at it and said, the springs are a little bit loose. So he sold me 3 springs, which were under $3 each. So for under $9, I got 3 new springs on my clutch. And then he was nice enough to install them for me at the dealer. So that was kind of cool. But hopefully you're seeing that, I was hoping to show you guys a before and after, but the clutch seems to be a little bit tighter. The next thing was, because I changed the carburetor, this is the box from the carburetor I changed to, the grommet, the old grommet, which had no limiting caps, didn't work anymore. So I got really lucky and I could order a grommet, and luckily the grommet is the right one if you have no limiting caps. And again, this grommet was like $3 to $5. It was really, cheap to get shipped out. So I will be putting this grommet back on the saw today, and this way, I can get my screws. I can get my screws where they need to be, and then I'm going to just put this old grommet back in the box with the old carb. And if you're wondering what the part number is for the grommet, hopefully you guys are seeing this. This is the grommet with limiting caps. This is the grommet without limiting caps. With limiting caps, it's much longer, and it kind of comes to a narrow point there. Without limiting caps, it's got a different design. Hopefully you're seeing that. But the part number for the one, if you don't have limiting caps, which is what I ordered, is actually right down here, and it's 1122-123-7503. And again, that's the one for the grommet for the carb without limiting caps. The other thing I wanted to talk about briefly was when I was ordering the grommet, the fellow who ordered the part for me said how ingenious the Stihl part number system is and how simple it is to understand once you understand it. So he explained that the first 4 numbers you see, that's going to be the model of the saw. So 1122 is a Stihl 066, and the grommet I ordered it's also 1122. And then he said the next three numbers are going to explain, and I didn't quite understand what that meant, but like a certain part of the saw. So here we've got the 120 for the carb, and the grommet is actually 123. So again, I didn't quite understand what he meant by that, but maybe it'll make more sense as I do more work. And then he said the last four numbers, in this case 0621, and in this case 7503, that's like a unique number for whatever part you're looking at. But I figure that might help somebody if they're looking for parts for a saw. If you need something for an 066, if the first four are 1122, you're on the right track. I'm sure there are exceptions, and I'm sure this isn't like a one-case-fits-all scenario. However, it's a good place to start when you're starting your searches. And just as I'm talking, I noticed that the clutch as well has a part number of 1122. So, something to consider. What I'm going to do now is go ahead and blow out all the sawdust in here. You know, you don't really take the clutch off very often, but I think I almost should as a preventative maintenance, because I've only run like 4 tanks of gas through this saw since the last time I took the clutch off, and it's already full of junk. So maybe that's a learning lesson there, to remove the clutch and also the anti-kickback system and blow that out. I know I took that out over the winter as well, and it was just ridiculously dirty. Looks a lot better when it's cleaned out, right? I want you to just keep in mind this little metal tang here, because this little metal tang is what has to catch the clutch drum, which basically drives the oil pump. So the first thing we're going to do is move our parts we don't need out of the way. Then we're going to go ahead and put this little flat washer on with the ridge facing up. Then we're going to put a little bit of anti-seize on here, which I'm fairly certain the manual is going to tell you not to do. So read the manual and follow the directions. If you've ever tried to remove a clutch that's been on forever, you'll understand why I'm putting some anti-seize on there. Okay, and it's reverse threaded. I hope you saw that. Now, I already took the plug out when I removed the clutch, so it's still loose. And then we're going to put our piston stop in here. And very gently just make sure that the piston isn't moving anywhere. And then we can tighten our clutch. Which is going the other direction, so now I'm sure there's a torque spec for that, so again, follow your manual. The way it's designed, it's only going to tighten as the saw runs, so I don't usually go nuts tightening it down, because I know they're hard enough to get off already when you take them off. Go ahead and put our spark plug back on. Okay. And then we've got this little roller bearing to put on. And I did put a little bit of grease on there. And then if you look at your clutch drum, there's a little notch right here. So what I need to do is match that little notch up with the little the little thing that was sticking out over there. So now we'll see if we can get that on. So that feels right. But if it didn't go down all the way for some reason, don't force anything. Please don't force anything, ever. If something's not working, figure out why. Okay, and then we're gonna put this little cover on. And then we need a pair of pliers. And we can go ahead. Oh, you know what we forgot? So we got the clutch drum, and then this is the rim sprocket right here. That goes on next. Then we put this thing here, and then we put this E-clip. And if we're having a good day, it's not going to fly across the garage. And we're having a good day. So there's our clutch. And then we're going to go ahead and see if we can get this piece in here. And it's probably going to fight a little bit. So we'll just gently massage this piece in. Okay, we got all that on. Next, we're going to go ahead and pull our spark plug boot off and put our shroud on here. So there's a little notch on this side where the spark plug actually goes in, the spark plug wire. And then we've got 3 screws. And unfortunately, there is no magnetism in my, hold on. There was a little bit of magnetism there, so that saved us with getting that one in. Come on, baby, catch some threads. All right. Did not have that even close to lined up, but now I do. Snug, but don't strip it. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and put our spark plug boot back on. And then we've got this little thing here. Not really sure what it does, but they must have included it for a reason. Okay, air filter. All right, let's see if we can get this bar and chain back on. Okay. All right, let me put some fuel and oil in this puppy and we'll go give her a shot. I have not run this saw in about a week, so let's see how she does today. I'm gonna pull the cord a few times to prime the carb. Contact. It popped. This time I'm gonna try the restart without the choke on. Hopefully it'll go better. Okay guys, well, I've got this saw tuned in as much as I can get it tuned in, and I think it's just running the way a 20-year-old saw runs. Few things I noticed, and it could just be my tachometer is off, but I'm noticing the saw idles at 22 to 2300 RPM. If I set the idle to that, the chain doesn't move. So, you know, I had it before like 2500, so we lowered it a couple hundred RPM. I'll notice it'll dip down to like 1900 RPM and then jump right back up. So, you know, probably it's just me overanalyzing things. The high end, I've got it at, you know, if I hold the trigger, if I hold the throttle for like 5 seconds, it'll go up to like 12,850. That's pretty much where it stops. A few times it went up to 13.2, so I just backed off the high-speed screw a touch more, so it didn't over rev. Saw starts on one pull. There was one time it didn't start on one pull because I had it choked and it almost got flooded, or I think it did get flooded, but it will start on one pull if you half choke it right after you turn it off. So this is as good as it gets for me, folks. I mean, I don't know what more I could do to this saw. So I made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I made 6 cuts today, and now I'm kind of debating whether I just go ahead and finish all my cuts on this log and, you know, get this log out of the way and just move on with life. And then this saw is probably going to sit in my shed for 5 years until another one of my maple trees comes down. But you know, in the end, the problem may have been me tuning, but I really do feel like the new carb made a difference, whether that difference was just that I'm used to tuning those style carbs. I have an 036 and 046, but I feel like I know what I'm doing now, as opposed to that other carb with the red tabs. I don't know if they changed the way those tune, if the amount of tune in the screws is different, but what I'm basically trying to say is I like the older style carb better. So that's where we are today, guys. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.